so much good for us in terms of, for those of us who are historians, who are sociologists and so forth, because this collection was not there before, or rather the understanding of what we have shall really came to bring to the table. And I think that made a major difference. And Mr. Kamene has been very much involved in that. And I think Dan also knows that we have, for example, Dr. Darcy, one of the elders in our community, has a list of manuscripts. He's very ill at present, although he's still on his feet, but he's not as healthy as he used to be, and he writes regularly for Muslim Views. If you look at the newspaper, he has a column. And that basically stands out in different ways because of the contribution in it. But more importantly, is what he has in his possession. And what you just raised is so critical, because unfortunately our community needs to be educated and educated. And I think the issue of accessibility is a very critical one, because not everybody can come at the same time and eat. So you have to be careful. But nonetheless, I think it's an issue that hopefully we will be sort of addressing.
May I
Yes.
just interject before you proceed
Yeah.
with your presentation, just to say that there are a number of precedents for the safeguarding of collections like that. For example, in South Africa, our new heritage legislation available on certain occasions or for certain functions, so that it goes back, it serves a kind of ceremonial or ritual purpose that it may have served in terms of artifact, but it's returned into a place where it is kept safely, which is physically safe. So there are all sorts of precedents and there are ways to work through these challenges. And I think with opening up the discussion, we will explore these. Because this is not just a South African legacy; it's a legacy for the whole world. And these documents that are here are unique, and they need to be safeguarded.
Thanks for adding that, because I want to come. The sort of catalogs that were collected or were created, were constructed, I think were very helpful, and we'll come to that in a moment. I've got too many slides to basically squeeze into the time that we have, so I'm going to fleetingly go through some of them and just stop at some and just talk about them, or talk sort of about the issues related to them. So just bear with me. I can share these slides with you as such, but let me just sort of try to, within 10 minutes, 12 minutes, I try to squeeze, because we know our time is also is also of essence. Now, what we were sort of trying to basically do and highlight is the fact that, and this is a synopsis of the whole presentation. Just to introduce, and of course I think, thank you to my previous presenter, he gave a particular context in which we need to look at these as well. Southeast Asia, Southern Africa, basically socio-historical connections, look at the communities and languages, and that is a very critical ingredient that sort of we need to look at, particularly when we talk about Malay manuscripts vis-a-vis the Arab Afrikaans. So there are these dimensions. Leave aside the theoretical frame then we look at the catalogs, and those are the critical ones that I think we just want to concentrate on, just pertain to perhaps of the way going forward. And then we want to talk specifically about the two iconic figures, that is Tuan and Sheikh Yusuf, who basically the outputs are critically different ways, and the evolution of this, we don't want to maybe sort of dwell too much on that, but there's a process that has taken place. And what is interesting is to note at what point some of these manuscripts landed here or found their way here, and basically did not only find their way in families, but they basically were copied and spread. So, of course, much more research needs to be done in terms of how this whole process took place or unfolded. Then we want to sort of give samples, like Sheikh Yusuf Sir al-Asrar, for example, or Sanusi's al-Barahin. These are all very, we know back in the Indonesian archipelago, these were critical texts, and how these found their way to the Cape. And of course, lastly, to talk about the unacknowledged sort of genre within South African literary history is the whole issue of Arab Afrikaans. It's a literature on its own, although small, but the contribution has been large. And of course, of late, quite a few people, like the very recent book by Muhammad Alexander, who basically brought to the fore the Cape Muslim vernacular, which is a very interesting compilation, which I think one can sort of talk about. So having that as a synopsis, so allow me now to just briefly go through this. I'm not going to go through the maps, as we all have that understanding. What I just want to share is that in 1998, I compiled a bibliography on Muslims in Africa. The idea basically was to at least create a sort of a guide for future research, for present and future research, because students have been emerging, and of course of late, now that more than 20 years has passed, so much research has been done, and I'm currently busy with an updated catalog, which is an enormous project. It's not easy to do, but we try to do it as best as we can in the circumstances. But the idea here is to create another type of guide and reservoir of information that others can tap in and say, instead of reinventing the wheel, they can go there and see what has been covered, what hasn't been covered, what needs to be covered, and in that way, I think they are important. Interestingly, in Malaysia, there has been two scholars, Hanabi Dollah and Professor Wan Hashim, who wrote an interesting book on Malay Cape, the Afrika Selatan, which is a very useful, very colorful sort of compilation of information. So, added to that, another publication which just recently, because of COVID, unfortunately, could never be publicized, or was publicized, but it wasn't launched in publicly, was this book, which is a collection of translations of Sheikh Yusuf's works into English. So this was published in 2020, 2022. So we hope to have a relaunch of this particular book. But the point is that, again, here is a set of manuscripts that have now been given life through another language, hopefully to spur on further research on these, but also to question, because the question has been, did Sheikh Yusuf write any manuscript whilst he was interred? And the argument is basically definitely no. Because he was already an established figure back in the archipelago, and when by the time he landed here, he had brought some of these, or he had some of these memorized, and as a result, we basically, whether they will circulate here, again, depends on the sort of extent of our research, whether we can dig up any evidence to basically demonstrate whether a manuscript of 2 or 3 had been written here, knowing that he had written more than 30. So his influence is important. There are books in Bahasa Indonesia that have appeared of late, and these are very some. The most recent work that we had edited, myself and another colleague from the Indonesian embassy, is evaluating Sheikh Yusuf's Al-Makassari and Imam Abdullah Tidori, that is from Guru's ideational teachings. Now, here again, we hope to have it launched within the next month, because the books only landed at the embassy last week. Has been a very popular teaching model that has been adopted in the Muslim local schools, and that in itself is an important contribution. But again, because we haven't studied them in depth, we only came to realize now as we sort of look back, and these are what some of these writers have been trying to do. Now, as we say, we're going to sort of just skip to some of them. The issue of language, as we had mentioned earlier on, and as we all know, is such a critical part of our identity that we need to reflect on it, whether it's in a creolized form, whether it's in a pure form, whatever it is. The point of the matter is language and identity is identity, and how to express them. Some express them through the manuscript, and we'll sort of come to those, others through other means, and I think that's important. So like we said, unfortunately we can't really we didn't come here to give a lecture to you on all of these issues, but I mean, we basically try to share here. But let's talk quickly about scholars and scholarship. I think this is an important, at least we can say there are some scholars in the past who try to give sense to these. And one of them was Van Selms, Adrianus Van Selms, Afrikaner scholar from the Netherlands, who came to South Africa, taught at University of Pretoria and I think at UNISA, who basically tried to make sense of these. And this is one book, Afrikaans, Arabic Afrikaans Studies, Tweetalige Arabische en Afrikaans Catechismus. So here again, it's bilingual sort of text, which again helps to give sense